battered stone bridge above a cold, restless sea, three newborn German shepherds whimpered inside a woven basket. A respected philanthropist watched in silence. A young maid
Target island in
begged.
sight, closing fast.
No one intervened.
Lightning struck! All
They didn't
stations,
notice
mark
the quiet
status!
man stepping forward, eyes steady, jaw set. They didn't know his calm was forged in war.
Let me go!
And they had
Ma'am,
no
you
idea
need to calm
this
down.
single moment
Please,
would
miss,
become a
it's for your own
test
good.
of faith,
Stop resisting.
courage,
What a
and
beautiful
God's
sight you all
quiet
are.
miracles.
Rest easy, little
Before
ones.
we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe. A cold sea wind swept the stone bridge at dusk, carrying salt and the promise of rain. Behind the white-walled estate, perched above the water, a trash bin sat where no guests ever looked. That morning, the mother German shepherd lay lifeless beyond the hedges, her body dragged away by workers who did not pause to ask how she had died. No one marked the spot. No one spoke her name. What remained were three newborns, only days old, left in the bin, blind eyes sealed, bellies hollow, skin still soft and pink beneath sparse black and tan fuzz. The young maid found them by accident. She was slight and careful in the way people become when they have learned not to take up space. Her hair, dark brown and tied low, fell loose as she knelt, breath catching when she heard the faintest sound, a thin broken whisper of life. She lifted the lid and froze. The puppies were stacked together for warmth, trembling, their mouths opening without sound, as if practicing how to ask the world for mercy. Her hands shook. She was not brave by nature, but fear can sharpen love into resolve. She wrapped them in an old towel, pressed them to her chest, and hurried back inside. She hid them in her small room, feeding them with a teaspoon warmed in her palms, drop by careful drop. She held them beneath a thin blanket and counted their breaths, listening for footsteps in the hall. Each creak made her heart slam. She knew the house. She knew its rules. Above all, she knew its owner. The mistress of the estate was a heavy-set woman of wealth and influence, her presence filling rooms the way perfume does, sweet on the surface, overpowering if you lingered. Her hair was silvered and perfectly styled, her skin smooth from money and time, her voice practiced in kindness. To the town, she was a benefactor, the woman who hosted charity luncheons, who posed with smiling children and spoke warmly about compassion. People called her a pillar of goodness. Inside the house, her generosity had edges. When she discovered the puppies, she did not raise her voice. She smiled. It was a small smile, polite, like the closing of a door. "They're filth," she said, as if discussing dust. "And filth spreads." She gave an order, measured and clean. "Take care of it." By afternoon, the sky had dimmed. The young maid was handed a woven basket, light, neat, and unforgiving in its purpose. Inside, the three lives pressed together, shivering. She carried them with her head bowed, as down the path that led to the old stone bridge spanning the gray water. The sea below breathed slowly, patient. Wind tugged at her skirt. She fell to her knees near the railing, hands clutching the basket, words tumbling out of her in a rush she could not control. She begged without looking up, afraid to meet the eyes that ruled her world. The puppies stirred, tiny bodies trembling, noses seeking warmth. The mistress stepped closer, her coat immaculate, her posture steady. To passers-by, she would have looked composed, charitable even, an elder guiding a foolish girl. Her hand moved toward the basket with the certainty of someone accustomed to decisions being final. Footsteps sounded behind them, measured, unhurried, unmistakably out of place. A man approached from the far end of the bridge, tall and broad-shouldered, whilst wearing plain clothes that did nothing to hide the disciplined strength beneath. His hair was cut short, dark with threads of gray, his jaw square and marked by old lines that spoke of long nights and harder choices. His eyes, calm and watchful, took in the scene without drama. At his side walked a full-grown German shepherd, 5 or 6 years old, black and tan coat thick against the cold, ears upright, amber eyes steady. The dog did not bark. He did not pull. He stopped when the man stopped, body aligned like a shield. The maid heard them and looked up, hope flickering and dying all at once. The mistress turned, irritation masked by a courteous nod. The man closed the distance quickly, not in a run, but with a precision that carried urgency without panic. He saw the basket. He saw the girl's hands shaking. He saw the sea. The mistress's fingers hooked beneath the basket's rim. The man lunged. In the space of a breath, his hand clamped down, arresting the motion. The basket jerked and stilled, suspended over the railing. The puppies cried, thin, reedy sounds that cut through the wind. The German shepherd stepped forward, muscles taut, positioning himself between the basket and the drop. His gaze locked on the woman's hand, as if it were a threat he understood perfectly. For a heartbeat, the world balanced on that edge. The sea waited. The maid sobbed, soundless, forehead pressed to the stone. The mistress's smile hardened into something brittle. The man's grip did not loosen. He felt the weight, not just of the basket, but of a line crossed too many times by too many people who assumed no one would stop them. The basket hovered, inches from the void. And then the wind shifted, carrying the puppies' cries down toward the water, where they seemed to disappear before they could finish becoming sound. The basket did not fall. That single fact, small as it seemed, unsettled the balance of the bridge. The heavy woman's smile thinned, her eyes flicking from the man's hand to the dog's rigid stance. The young maid remained on her knees, fingers locked together until they ached, afraid that if she moved, the moment would shatter and the sea would claim everything. The man did not raise his voice. He did not lecture. He simply held the weight steady, feeling the fragile tremor inside the woven rim, until the woman released her grip as if it were her idea. She stepped back, smoothing her coat, already rearranging the story in her mind. She reached for her phone with practiced ease. It was the same motion she used to summon caterers, drivers, donors, authority compressed into a polished rectangle. Within minutes, the distant hum of an engine approached the bridge. The woman's posture relaxed. This was familiar ground. She had stood on stages and in boardrooms, smiling for cameras and shaking hands with officials. A brief inconvenience could be corrected with a word. The local police arrived quickly, 2 officers in dark uniforms that carried the marks of routine rather than urgency. The older one, broad through the shoulders with a soft belly and a mustache carefully trimmed, stepped forward first. His eyes moved to say hello before his mouth did. The younger officer lingered half a step behind, tall and narrow, his expression alert but deferential. Both greeted the woman by name. Both listened. The woman spoke calmly, her voice warm, tinged with concern. She gestured toward the man and the basket as if pointing out a hazard on a sidewalk. There was a stranger here, she said. A disturbance. Someone interfering with her property. She spoke of safety, of a frightened employee, of animals that did not belong to him. Her words flowed with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed. The older officer nodded. The younger glanced at the maid, who stared at the stone beneath her hands, lips pressed together so tightly they had gone pale. The man set the basket down, gently, away from the railing. The German shepherd remained between them and the sea, unmoving, eyes alert. The man straightened and faced the officers. Up close, the lines in his face were clearer. A shallow scar near his jaw, stubble grown in evenly, eyes that had learned to measure distance and intention. He spoke with restraint, choosing words the way a carpenter chooses tools. He explained what he had seen. He explained why he had stepped in. He did not accuse. He did not beg. The older officer listened without interruption, then tilted his head slightly, as if considering a different angle. He asked the man for identification. He asked where he was staying, He asked why he had involved himself in a private matter. The younger officer shifted, uncomfortable, gaze darting between the basket and the woman's face. The woman's mouth curved upward again, a patient smile, the kind that suggested she had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. When the man finished, the older officer cleared his throat. "From what we've been told," he said, "it sounds like you caused a scene. Tried to take animals that weren't yours?" He gestured vaguely, as if the facts were already settled. The woman's hand touched her chest in mock relief. The maid swallowed hard. Her silence weighed on her, heavy as the basket had been. The man did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He waited for the words to land, then nodded once. "There's a camera near the bridge," he said evenly. "Let's pull the footage." It was a simple suggestion, offered without challenge, as if it were the most reasonable next step. For the first time, the woman's composure faltered. It was barely perceptible, a tightening at the corners of her eyes, a pause that lasted half a breath too long. The older officer frowned. The younger looked up sharply. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice, and spoke to the older officer in a tone meant for private rooms. Her hand rested lightly on his sleeve, familiar and practiced. She said it was unnecessary. She said it had been a misunderstanding. She said the camera had been unreliable lately. The officer's frown eased. He nodded, glancing toward the younger officer with a look that closed the matter. The younger officer hesitated. "We could check," he began, but the older man cut him off with a shake of the head. "No need," he said. "Camera's been down. Maintenance issue." The words were delivered casually, like a weather report. The maid's shoulders slumped. The German shepherd's ears flicked, then stilled again, his gaze never leaving the woman. The older officer turned back to the man. "Looks like a misunderstanding," he said. "You can go." It was dismissal wrapped in courtesy. The woman's smile returned, fuller now, satisfied. She did not look at the basket. She did not look at the maid. She looked at the man, certain she had won. The man nodded. He thanked the officers. He thanked the woman. He placed himself between the basket and the railing one last time, ensuring it was secure, then stepped away. The German shepherd followed, close at his side, silent. As they walked, the man felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the recognition of a system closing ranks. He had seen it before in different uniforms and different places. Power rarely announced itself. It simply decided. Behind them, the woman spoke again, her voice sweet as she reassured the officers that everything was under control. The older officer laughed softly. The younger remained quiet, his eyes lingering on the basket before he turned away. The maid rose slowly, hands trembling, aware that her silence had been noticed and recorded in ways she could not undo. At the far end of the bridge, the man stopped. He looked back once, taking in the scene as a whole, the woman's posture, the officer's stance, the basket set carefully on stone as if it were an inconvenience rather than a life. He did not feel anger so much as clarity. This was not a single act of cruelty. This was a pattern, reinforced and protected. The law here wore a familiar face. He turned and walked on, the sound of the sea following him. He did not know where the night would lead, but he understood one thing with certainty. The woman was not merely wealthy. She was the rule by which this town lived. And rules, once exposed, could be broken. Night fell without ceremony. The bridge emptied, the sea darkened, and the estate lights came on one by one, warm and inviting to anyone who did not know what they hid. The young maid did not return to her narrow room. She was guided instead through a side entrance and across a gravel path that curved behind the main house, past trimmed hedges and a row of trees that swallowed sound. She walked with her shoulders drawn inward, the woven basket held tight to her body, as if her arms alone could shield what was inside. The woman who owned the house did not walk with her. Orders did not require witnesses. The shed stood apart from the beauty of the estate, a low structure of corrugated metal and wood, its door scarred by years of use. There were no windows. When the door opened, the smell came first: damp earth, old oil, and rust. Inside, a single bulb hung from a wire, unlit. The door closed with a heavy finality, metal meeting metal, and the lock slid home. The sound echoed. The maid flinched. She set the basket down on the concrete floor and knelt, pulling the towel closer around the puppies. They were quieter now, exhausted by cold and hunger, their bodies pressed together in a small, instinctive pile. When they cried, it was not a sound meant to carry. It was the fragile whimper of creatures too young to understand fear, asking only for warmth. The maid covered her mouth with her sleeve to keep from making a noise of her own. Tears came anyway, silent and hot, tracking down her cheeks as she rocked slightly, whispering nonsense words she hoped felt like promises. She knew the woman who owned the estate would sleep well that night. The woman always did. But she also knew the rules of this place. Questions were punished. Gratitude was expected. Silence was survival. The maid's name did not matter here. Her life was arranged for her days measured by tasks and obedience. She had learned to make herself small, to disappear when necessary. But the cries in the dark made something in her chest refuse to settle. She pressed her forehead to the cold floor and breathed shallowly, counting each breath so it would not become a sob. Beyond the estate walls, the man did not leave town. He checked into a modest room above a closed shop near the water, the kind of place that smelled faintly of soap and old wood. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, elbows on his knees, listening to the night. The German shepherd lay at his feet, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The dog's coat was dense and well kept, his muzzle flecked with gray that suggested age and experience rather than neglect. He had learned patience in places where patience was the difference between life and death. The man rose before midnight. He did not pack much. He did not need to. He moved through the quiet streets toward the estate, staying to shadowed paths and low walls, the dog pacing him without a sound. The air smelled of rain. Somewhere a gull cried, sharp and lonely. As they neared the perimeter fence, the German shepherd slowed. His ears lifted, angling toward the back of the property. His body stiffened, a subtle shift that the man recognized immediately. The dog stopped entirely, head turning slightly as if tuning an instrument. At first, the man heard nothing. Then, faintly, there it was, a thin, uneven sound that did not belong to the night. Not a bark, not a scream. A broken whine, too weak to travel far, threaded with desperation. The man closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound resolve itself. It came again, followed by another, a chorus of small, failing notes. The dog's chest vibrated with a low, restrained breath, not a growl, but a warning held in check. The man crouched, resting a hand briefly on the dog's shoulder. "Easy," he murmured, more to himself than to the animal. He scanned the property, noting the positions of lights, the angle of the shed, the lack of movement near the main house. He had learned long ago to read places the way others read faces. This place believed it was untouchable. That belief made it careless. They moved along the fence line until the shed was in view, a darker shape against darker trees. The cries came again, clearer now, unmistakable. The man felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a recognition that cut through hesitation. He had walked away from many things in his life, learned when to retreat and when to endure. But some decisions were not decisions at all. They were responses. He tested the lock quietly, then the hinge. The metal complained under the slightest pressure, old and poorly maintained. He adjusted his grip, applying force in a way that dispersed sound, the skill of someone who had learned how to open doors without announcing himself. The dog remained still. eyes fixed on the opening seam, as if willing it wider. Inside, the darkness pressed close. The man slipped in, pulling the door back just enough to close it again behind him. He waited, counting heartbeats, while listening. The cries rose and fell, uneven and exhausted. He clicked on a small light, shielding it with his palm. The beam found the maid first, her eyes wide, face streaked with tears, one hand lifted instinctively to protect the basket. Recognition dawned slowly, disbelief giving way to a soundless release as her shoulders shook. He knelt beside her, voice low and steady. "It's all right," he said, words chosen carefully, offered like a rope. He checked the puppies quickly, efficient but gentle, noting their shallow breaths and chilled bodies. He wrapped them tighter, tucking the towel around them, then added his own jacket, folding it to create a pocket of warmth. The puppies quieted, the cries easing into faint, rhythmic breaths. As he worked, he took in the shed with the same attention he had given the bridge. Was rusted hooks on the wall, stains on the floor that did not belong to rainwater, an old chain coiled in a corner, its links worn smooth. These were not the tools of storage. They were the remnants of control. He did not touch anything he did not need to. He did not disturb the arrangement. He memorized it. They left as they came, silent and deliberate. The dog led, then paused once, looking back toward the shed as if imprinting its shape. The maid followed, clutching the bundle to her chest, breath shaking, but unbroken. Outside the fence, the night received them without comment. The estate remained still, lights glowing softly, confident in its own authority. The man did not take them far. He found shelter enough to warm the puppies and the woman, a place where walls did not listen. Now only when the puppy's breathing steadied did he allow himself to sit, back against the wall, eyes closed for a moment longer than necessary. He knew this was only the beginning. Rescue, he had learned, was not the end of a story. It was an opening. Before dawn, he moved again. He walked the roads near the bridge, knocking softly where lights were still on, introducing himself without names or demands. He spoke to a fisherman with weathered hands and a lined face who had passed beneath the bridge that afternoon. He spoke to a couple who lived in a small house overlooking the water, their porch angled just right. He did not accuse. He asked what they had seen. He spoke of the law plainly, of responsibility and truth, of lives that had nearly been erased because silence was easier. Some doors closed, others did not. A phone was lifted, or a memory was replayed. A file was shared quietly, hands trembling with a mix of fear and relief. The man listened. He thanked them. He did not promise safety. He promised accuracy. The dog waited beside him, a steady presence, tail still, eyes watchful. As the sky began to lighten, the man gathered what he had been given. He understood the risk. He also understood the pattern. People who had been pressed down long enough learned to recognize a moment when standing up might finally matter. He left each place as he found it, careful not to draw attention, carrying with him the weight of what had been hidden. When the sun rose, the estate would wake, believing the night had passed without consequence. The woman would prepare for her day. The town would move, as it always had. But the cries in the dark had been heard. And once heard, they could not be returned to silence. Morning arrived quietly, the way it always did in a town that believed nothing truly changed. Sunlight slid across the estate's manicured lawns, glinted off white stone, and warmed the harbor beyond. Inside the main house, the wealthy woman moved through her routine with practiced ease. She dressed carefully, selecting soft colors that photographed well, jewelry understated, but unmistakably expensive. Her hair, silver and full, was arranged just so. To anyone who saw her that day, she would look exactly as she always did, composed, benevolent, untroubled. The night, she assumed, had ended where it should, in silence. She did not know that silence had already broken. The man did not sleep. He sat at a small table in the rented room above the shop, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside his hand. The German shepherd lay at his feet, lie awake, head lifted. The dog's name was not spoken. It did not need to be. He was 6 years old, built powerfully through the chest, his black and tan coat thick and clean, his eyes a steady amber that missed little. Years earlier, harsh training and harder losses had shaped him into an animal that did not waste energy on noise. He observed. He waited. He acted only when it mattered. Across the room, the young maid, Sarah, sat wrapped in a borrowed sweater, the rescued puppies bundled close against her. Sarah was in her early 20s, slender, with pale skin that bruised easily and hands marked by work. Her light brown hair fell to her shoulders now that it was no longer tightly pinned, and her eyes, a soft gray blue, carried exhaustion deeper than her years. She had not stopped touching the puppies since the night before, eyed as if her hands were the only proof they still existed. They were quieter now, warmed and fed, their tiny bodies rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Only days old, their eyes still sealed, they rooted instinctively, unaware of how narrowly they had missed the end of their lives. Sarah watched them breathe and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the first fragile sense that fear might not have the final word. The man spoke gently, asking her to rest, to eat. She nodded, but did neither. She had lived too long on borrowed safety to trust it fully. When she did speak, her voice was low and careful. She told him about the shed, about the chains she had seen before, the way certain rooms were never cleaned, the people who left the estate quietly and never returned. She spoke without accusation, only fact, as the way someone does when hope is no longer tied to being believed. He listened without interruption. Listening, he had learned, was often the most useful skill of all. By mid-morning, he was moving again. Not quickly, not openly. He walked the roads near the bridge as if he belonged there, stopping to admire the view, to greet those who lingered. He spoke first with an older fisherman named Thomas, a man with deeply lined skin and hands permanently smelling of salt and rope. Thomas had lived on the water his entire life and trusted it more than he trusted people. The man did not ask for favors. He asked what Thomas had seen the day before. When Thomas hesitated, the man spoke of the puppies, how small they were, how easily they could have disappeared. He spoke of laws not as weapons, but as obligations. Thomas exhaled slowly. Adi then nodded once. He had a camera mounted on his boat, he said. It had been running. Next came a couple who lived in a weathered house overlooking the bridge. Margaret and Elaine, both in their late 60s, retired school teachers who still woke early out of habit. Margaret was tall and spare, her hair cut short and white, her posture straight from years of standing at chalkboards. Elaine was softer, round-faced, with dark hair streaked by gray and eyes that missed little. They had watched the scene unfold from their porch, watched the basket hover, watched the police arrive. They had argued quietly afterward about whether to say anything. When the man explained why silence had almost cost 3 lives, Margaret's jaw tightened. Elaine reached for her phone. Not every door opened. Some closed quickly, fear winning out over conscience. The man did not press them. He understood fear intimately. He moved on, collecting what he could, piece by piece. Video files were transferred quietly. Times and angles were confirmed. Names were not asked for unless freely offered. He did not promise protection. He promised only that truth, once seen, had a way of multiplying. By afternoon, he had enough to know what came next. He returned briefly to the room above the shop, where Sarah waited with the puppies. He explained his plan carefully, making sure she understood her choices. He did not tell her what to do. He never did. When she nodded, her expression steadier than it had been before. He knew she had already chosen. The charity event was held that evening in the town's largest hall, draped in white and gold, lit warmly to soften edges and flatter faces. Floral arrangements lined the stage. A banner bearing the estate owner's name hung behind the podium, accompanied by words like compassion and community. Guests arrived dressed for admiration, murmuring approval as cameras flashed. The woman moved among them with practiced grace, touching arms, smiling, thanking donors. Her voice, when she laughed, carried easily. Backstage, the man stood near the equipment table, unremarkable in plain clothes, his presence overlooked. The German shepherd lay nearby, still and silent, content to be where he was told. Sarah waited off to the side, the puppies safely elsewhere, her hands clasped tightly together. She had never been in a place like this before. The lights felt too bright. The air felt thin. The woman took the stage to applause. She spoke of kindness. She spoke of responsibility. And she spoke of protecting those who could not protect themselves. Her tone was warm, confident, maternal. Heads nodded. A few people dabbed at their eyes. When she finished, the man stepped forward. The change in the room was subtle at first, a ripple of curiosity, then confusion. He did not interrupt her speech. He waited until the moment invited response. When he spoke, his voice carried without strain. He asked, politely, for the screen behind her to be turned on. A technician hesitated, glanced toward the woman. She smiled, puzzled, and nodded as if indulging a harmless request. The first image filled the screen. The bridge, the basket, the woman's hand on the rim, the maid on her knees, pleading, the sea below, dark and waiting. A murmur swept the room. The footage continued, seamless now. Another angle showed the police arriving. The conversation unfolding as the truth bent and folded in on itself. Then the shed, still images, then video, showing rusted hooks, chains, stains that could not be explained away. The hall grew very quiet. Faces changed. Smiles vanished. Sarah stepped forward then, her voice shaking but clear. She did not embellish. She did not accuse. She told the truth as she had lived it. The woman did not speak. For the first time, she did not know how. By the time officials began moving through the crowd, questions already forming, the dominoes had started to fall. The man stepped back, becoming again what he had been all along, an observer who refused to look away. The room did not erupt the way scandals do in movies. There was no shouting, no rush for the exits. What spread instead was something quieter and far more dangerous to those who had depended on silence. Recognition. People stared at the screen as if it had begun to speak directly to them, not about one woman or one act, but about the cost of looking away. The air felt heavier, as though everyone were breathing the same thought at once and unsure how to release it. The woman on the stage stood very still. Up close, the softness of her public image fractured. Her shoulders were broad beneath her tailored jacket, her posture rigid now that performance no longer served her. Her face, carefully maintained over decades, seemed suddenly older. The smile that had once reassured donors and officials did not return. She glanced toward the back of the hall, then toward the side doors, calculating. For the first time in years, calculation did not bring comfort. Uniformed officials moved through the crowd, not with urgency, but with intent. Their expressions were neutral, their steps measured. One of them, a middle-aged investigator from the county office, tall and narrow with steel-gray hair and eyes that did not flinch, paused near the stage. His presence alone altered the room. He was not local. He did not nod deferentially. He listened. Sarah stood near the aisle, her hands trembling but unclenched. Under the bright lights, she looked younger than she was, slender, pale, her hair now loosely tied back, strands catching the light. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried farther than she expected. She described the shed, the chains, as the fear that had governed her days. She spoke of being told that gratitude was her duty, that silence was protection. She did not embellish. She did not weep. She simply told what had happened. Each sentence landed with a soft, final weight. As she spoke, something shifted among the audience. A woman in a server's uniform near the back wiped her eyes. A man who had once done maintenance work on the estate stared at his hands as if seeing them clearly for the first time. These were people accustomed to being invisible, their experiences dismissed as misunderstandings or bad luck. Now they were being invited, without words, to remember. The investigator raised a hand gently, signaling a pause. He addressed the room with a voice that did not seek approval. He explained that an inquiry was being opened, effective immediately. He asked for anyone with relevant information to remain. He asked others to leave calmly. The woman on the stage attempted to speak then, her voice sharp with a rehearsed note of indignation. The investigator did not interrupt her. He simply continued speaking, his words moving past her as if she were no longer the axis of the room. Outside, the evening had deepened into night. Cars idled. Phones buzzed. By the time the doors reopened, the story had already begun to travel, carried not by rumor, but by evidence. The man stepped aside as people filed out, becoming once more a presence that did not demand attention. His German shepherd waited at his heel, posture relaxed but alert, as if aware that the moment of tension had passed, but the work was not yet finished. In the days that followed, the town changed its rhythm. Once investigators returned, this time in numbers, their vehicles unfamiliar, their questions precise. The shed behind the estate was examined under bright lights, photographs were taken, measurements recorded. What had once been dismissed as storage was catalogued for what it was. The bridge became a point of reference rather than a place to forget. Footage from boats and porches circulated through official channels, its angles overlapping until denial became impossible. People began to come forward. A housekeeper who had worked for the woman years earlier described being warned never to enter certain rooms. A groundskeeper spoke of nights when he had been told to leave early, paid extra to forget what he had seen. A former driver recalled being instructed to take detours that made no sense at the time, and each story alone might have been set aside. Together, they formed a pattern that no amount of money could smooth over. The local police department faced questions as well. Reports once marked incomplete were retrieved. Timelines were reviewed. The younger officer from the bridge appeared once at the edge of a press photograph, his expression unreadable. The older officer did not appear at all. Silence, it seemed, was no longer a shield. Through it all, Sarah remained somewhere between exhaustion and awakening. She stayed in a small borrowed apartment near the water, the puppies safe and growing stronger by the day. Their eyes opened one by one, dark and curious, their movements clumsy and determined. She learned their sounds, their small personalities emerging, one restless, one cautious, one content to sleep curled against her wrist. Caring for them anchored her. Each feeding was a promise kept. The man visited only once more. He checked on the puppies, nodded approval at their progress, and spoke quietly with Sarah about what would come next. He did not tell her how to live. He reminded her that she had choices now. That was all. When he left, it was without ceremony. He did not look back. The estate gates closed and did not reopen. The woman's public appearances ceased. Statements were issued by lawyers, careful and cold, but they did not stop the movement that had begun. Donations were frozen, partnerships dissolved. The banner from the charity event was taken down, its words folded away like an outdated costume. Months later, the bridge looked the same as it always had. Stone worn, smooth by time, sea moving endlessly beneath it. Lies, but those who passed over it felt something different. A story had been told there, and stories once told linger. Sarah walked the shoreline one afternoon with the puppies, now sturdy and playful, their coats filling in, their steps sure. She laughed when one stumbled and corrected himself, the sound surprising her with its ease. For the first time, she did not feel watched. Far from the town, the man and his dog moved on, the road unremarkable, the destination unimportant. They had never stayed long anywhere. The dog trotted ahead, tail low and relaxed, occasionally glancing back to ensure the man followed. He always did. What remained behind was not justice perfected, but justice begun. A chain reaction set in motion by a moment when a basket did not fall, when someone chose not to look away. The town would never again be quite as quiet. And in that disturbance, something fragile and necessary had taken root. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, when a hand refuses to let go, when a heart refuses to look away. God doesn't always stop the storm, but He places someone in its path. 3 small lives were spared not because the world suddenly became kind, but because one person listened when others chose silence. That is how grace moves, through ordinary people who decide to act with courage. In our daily lives, we are tested the same way, not with bridges and oceans, but with moments where we are tempted to walk past pain, to stay quiet, to say, "It's not my problem." Faith is not only what we pray, faith is what we do after the prayer. If this story touched you, please share it, because someone else may need to be reminded that God still works through compassion. Leave a comment with where you're watching from, subscribe to the channel to help these stories reach more hearts, and may God bless you and your family with protection, mercy, and peace. Amen.